Welcome to lecture number 3, our third video here, and the topic is Daniel chapter 2 and dreams. And we've kind of given you the introduction to dreams in our first video that we've looked at. We looked at Daniel the interpreter in our second video, and so our third video, we're going to actually be interpreting the dream itself in Daniel chapter 2, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar, the Gentile monarch of Babylon, has. And as we pointed out, okay, that dreams are very, very common in the occult world. For example, I have a book here, complete book of fortune telling. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go out and buy this, okay? It's nonsense. I'm just using it as an illustration. So don't go out, buy the book and say, Professor, you recommended that I buy. No, I'm not doing that. I'm just showing you an example of nonsense in some of these books of interpreting dreams of the occult world. Well, anyway, this particular book here on fortune telling has a chapter, Dreams and Their Interpretation. All right? So, for example, let's just say you dreamed about a spider last night. So I'm going to look that up, and I'm going to say, what does dreaming about a spider signify or mean? So I look it up, spider. They say a lucky escape from an accident. If, however, you see a spider spinning, you will receive a great sum of money. Well, that's pretty interesting, isn't it? Or maybe let's just say you dream about a rat. This signifies secret and powerful enemies. You will defeat them if you kill the rat. Well, okay, what about potatoes? All right, to dig for them denotes gain. To eat them forebodes heavy losses and dishonesty in business. If you dream about a prophet, it's an unfavorable dream. You will be misled by a false statement. You see, anybody can make up these nonsensical definitions or meanings of supposedly what dreams are. But they are a big, big part of the occult world, okay? So that's very common. But we've shown you here from chapter 1 that we don't need to resort to such occult means, whether it's Ouija boards or Madame Rue or whatever those case may be, so-and-so, Madame Toussaint down the street, who can read your palm or tell you what your future will be, or the prophetess that's in your church that supposedly you can go to and ask, am I going to get out of debt this year? And she'll say, yes, absolutely. Most of the time, the prophets that I've supposedly heard never prophesy anything bad. Well, the Old Testament prophets were always prophesying something bad. That's why some of the kings refused to go to the prophets of God, because they'd say, he never says anything good. It's always something evil. Well, none of the prophets or prophetesses today that I've ever heard warn about sinfulness or wickedness. You see, the prophets of that day were telling people everything's going to be okay. The Babylonians are not going to come. Don't have to worry about them. The Assyrians are not going to have to, you don't have to worry about them. The Persians are no threat. Everything's going to be fine, hunky-dory. You can keep your sin, keep your lifestyle. Everything's fine. They were false prophets, and the prophets continually rebuked them for that. Now, the dreams that we've already kind of alluded to, most of all the dreams, unlike our crazy dreams that we have, dreams were at the heart of Israel's faith as a nation and a people. They were kind of like at the foundation of Israel's faith and history, or the beginning. Shaul Bar wrote a book called A Letter That Has Not Been Read, Dreams in the Hebrew Bible. And he points out that many of the dreams of the Old Testament were dreams that lay at the heart of Israel's religion and faith. For example, the covenants or the dreams that God gave Abraham and Jacob and some maybe to Joseph were always about the covenants that lied at the heart of Israel's history. Jacob's ladder in chapter 28 of Genesis was about the temple, where the temple would be, okay? The way of access to God. It was signifying the temple would be built. The temple was the heart of Jewish faith. The conquest in the book of Judges in chapter, I think, 7. There was one of the soldiers had a dream about conquering the Midianites. Well, that was a dream about conquest, Israel's conquest of the land. Solomon. Everybody knows 1 Kings 3, King Solomon's great dream, where God says, whatever you want, I'll give you. Had a dream, and God says, whatever you want, I will give you. Whatever you ask for is yours. Solomon does not ask for money. He does not ask for a wife. He already had 700 and 300 half-wives. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for fame or fortune. But he says, I want to ask God for wisdom so that I can lead the people wisely. You see, that was another dream that was referring to Israel as a nation, their king, their ruler. Joseph, and Joseph's dreams, of the dreams of others in Egypt in the book of Genesis were dreams about Israel's preservation as a nation and a people. So as he's giving dreams, to Joseph, or Joseph has dreams to stockpile all the food because there's going to be 7 years of famine. That was a dream that was preserving the nation and God's people. And then the New Testament dream. We see, dreams about Jesus, the Messiah. Joseph has a dream, take him into Egypt because Herod's trying to kill him. Then we see Pilate's wife, While Pilate is judging Jesus, the wife has a dream, says, don't do anything. Keep your hands off of this righteous man. But there are no dreams after Jesus is born. So none of the apostles, none of the writings of the New Testament, Paul never addresses dreams. There's no instructions given by Paul the apostle or the writers of the New Testament about how to interpret your dream. The prophets somewhat ridiculed dreams in the Bible or the prophetical books. So we've already pointed that out in chapter 1. They lay at the heart of Israel's as a nation. Now we're going to show you today and next week, we will show you that the Nebuchadnezzar's dream that's interpreted by Daniel here also refers to Israel's history as a nation and as a people. But this dream here is not a wacky dream, that he dreamed because he ate pepperoni pizza before he went to bed, but it's a dream coming from God because it's going to reveal God's sovereign control over Israel and over history. Now, we also have to keep in mind that one thing that dreams do tell us, they reveal God's sovereign control over the night, over our inactivity. Now, it's encouraging to know that while we are asleep, God is still in control of everything. We're helpless, we're inactive, we're asleep, we dream. But God still watches over us even during that time. So we don't have to do anything as believers. That's a comforting thought to know. And I'm going to do one of these videos. One of these lessons I'm going to do is on sleep in the Bible. I'm going to do one on what sleep means in the Bible and how the Bible interprets our sleep. But it's kind of like dreams, sleep, very similar. While we're inactive, God is still sovereign over us and everything. So we don't have to do anything as believers. Even when we lay down and sleep at night, we can rest assured that God is in control of the situation. Well, that's kind of like what we're seeing here. Nebuchadnezzar's sleeping, but yet he's having dreams, but the dreams are showing God's absolute control over Israel's history, Israel's destiny, and the destiny of the nations. And the good thing is, just like the other dreams that we've seen and I've just mentioned here, they lay at the heart of Israel's history. So does this one. This dream, of Nebuchadnezzar lies at the very heart of Israel's survival as a nation and a people. Because we're going to see here that God is sovereign over the nations. So all the Gentile nations, and that's what this dream's about. The kingdoms, the empires that will rule the world throughout history, and Israel will be the subject of those empires and kingdoms. But here's the great irony. All of these kingdoms that we're seeing here are gone with the wind. Babylon is gone. We see that Persia is gone. We see that Greece is gone. We see that Rome, the mighty Roman Empire, is gone. And the only thing that's left are the remnants, of the nations at the very end of history before Christ returns. That's still there. That's where we are right now in history. But yet we see God's sovereignty not over the nations, not over Israel. Israel will survive. The nations are gone with the wind, Persia is gone. Rome is gone. The mighty Roman Empire that ruled the world. All of these empires are gone. But Israel still exists. Of all the nations that have persecuted Israel, Israel still survives. Now you think about that. Think about Nazi Germany. 1939 to 1933 to 1945, the 6 million Jews were put into the gas chambers by Adolf Hitler and the Nazis. 1945, the war ended. 6 million Jews had been exterminated. In 3 years after that, 1948, Israel became a nation for the first time since 2,000 years ago. Since the time they were captured, they were basically subjugated, and they were basically their nation. They lost their kingdom, their empire for 2,000 years until 1948. 3 years after 6 million Jews were put into the gas chambers. Now, we see that Nazi Germany was not a world ruler. It's not mentioned here in Daniel's vision or dream, or Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Russia, who's playing a major role today, is also not in world history. They're not mentioned here in Daniel because they will not rule over the world. They'll not play a major role in that regard. But he does give you 4 nations, and we're going to see those in our lesson today. Now, we introduced you to the sovereignty of God over the occult. That's really what chapter 1 is all about, chapter 1 and 2. God has elevated Daniel to this place and this position, and so the astrologers, the soothsayers, cannot tell the king's dream that he had, and they cannot interpret it. If you remember the story, he had the dreams, and he told his magicians and magi and soothsayers, prophetesses, prophets, you tell me what the dream was, and then interpret it. Well, that's a surefire way, basically, of avoiding any deception by the occult. So they say, well, nobody has ever asked that of the astrologers or wise men or magi or advisors. Nobody's ever done that before. You tell us the dream, then we'll tell you what it means. He said, no, you tell me what the dream was because it slipped my mind. They said, we can't do that. Nobody's ever done that before. Well, I'm sure that they probably could. If they went through their occult rituals, they probably could have done that, maybe. But the point is, God is stopping it. God is not allowing it to happen. God is not allowing them to in any way give their deception or their interpretations. So there is no occult that can come up with the answer here. Why? Because this is showing God's absolute sovereignty over all occult, the powers of darkness, the demonic, Satan, and all the occult means they had of us ascertaining the future. God is going to make sure, that he is the one who is revealing and interpreting this dream. So in our previous video, we showed you the interpreter, Daniel the interpreter. We don't have time to go into that today because we want to get to what it actually means here. But we also have pointed out, that God is revealing the course of Gentile world domination and the course of history with this particular dream. It's one of the most far-reaching dreams ever or prophecies ever given in the Bible. But yet the dream reveals, Israel's history. This dream is a unique dream. There's never been any like it. And this dream is legitimately from God, It's not because he had too many pepperoni pizzas or cayenne pepper before he went to bed that night. Sometimes that causes people to dream. You can have too many spices, and that will cause you to dream. Well, this dream wasn't because of a pepperoni pizza. Now, by the way, you can get a pepperoni pizza. Now, Pizza Hut has them. They're called Spicy Lovers Pizza. If you want a really, really, really spicy hot one, you go to Pizza Hut and ask for the Spicy Lovers Pizza. Eat it before you go to bed, and if you dream, then you let me know. I'm interested to know about that because I had one yesterday. I don't recall dreaming, but if you have dreams, you let me know. This is a dream that's coming legitimately from God, and God is going to reveal through Daniel the entire course of Gentile history. So this dream kind of like brings us up to the present day in which we're living today. Now, I want to do this. I'm going to show you, okay, if you have your Bible, look at chapter 2, and we'll look at verse 31 to 36. 31 to 36 of Daniel chapter 2. Okay, so remember that Daniel says, okay, God reveals to Daniel, and remember the king Nebuchadnezzar said, if you can't tell me the dream, every one of you are going to die. I'm going to kill every one of you and your families. Well, Daniel prays to God, and God, he said, Lord, please don't let this happen, where this king kills all these people. But yet God revealed, okay, to Daniel, and so Daniel goes to the king and says, there is a God in heaven who can reveal your dream and tell you what it's about. So we pick up in verse 31, where Daniel says, thou, O king, saw and beheld a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before you, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold. His breast and his arms were of silver. His belly and his thighs were of brass. His legs were of iron, and his feet were part iron and part clay, mixture of two. Thou sawest till a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon the feet that were of iron and clay, and broke them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, the gold, broken in pieces together, and behold, like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, gone with the wind, that no place was found for them. These kingdoms of the world, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and it filled the entire earth. Now, that's the dream, okay, interpreted. That's the dream that was revealed. Now, we're going to give you the interpretation now of the four kingdoms that will come. All right, so let's keep reading, and we'll read from verses 36 till actually 43. So the next two verses, 44, 45, we'll cover in our next video. So verse 36, now he's given the dream. This is what the dream was. So he's interpreted now the dream he had, but he's not interpreted the aspects of the dream. He's going to do that now. Verse 36, this is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation before the king. Verse 37, he says, thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven has given you a kingdom and power and strength and glory. Wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven has he given into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. And then he says, you, King Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold on the image. Verse 39, okay, that's Babylon, one king. After thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to you, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. There's three. Now, he's not interpreted really what these are. He's just saying that Babylon's the first one. You're the head of this image. All right, we'll see in probably our next video or this one. Verse 40, the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things. And as iron breaks all of these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of iron, for as much as you saw the iron that was mixed with miry clay. As the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, the mixture, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas you saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to another, as iron cannot be mixed with clay. Now, that's the dream, okay, the interpretation of the dream. And I'm going to kind of explain to you the dream now and what those kingdoms are. So we're kind of revealing to you the four kingdoms or world empires that will run their course throughout history and bring us up to the present day in which we're living today of the 10 toes of the image. Okay, so he says now, we've already seen in verse 38, Daniel says, this huge image, there's the head is of gold, and then, of course, there is the breast and arms of silver, another metal that's less inferior. The belly and thighs were of brass. The legs were of iron, 2 legs of iron, and his feet were part iron and part clay. How you can do that? Well, he just said you can't do that. All right, so he says in verse 38, you're Nebuchadnezzar, you're the head of gold here. You're the first kingdom that is going to come and arise over Israel. So all of these kingdoms we're going to show you, the first of these is Babylon. And we see that Babylon really is the beginning of all of these different kingdoms that will dominate the world and rule over the world throughout history. Now, Babylon, really kind of like in 605 BC, Babylon invaded Israel, and they took the southern kingdom of Israel, Judah really, into captivity for 70 years because they had sinned against God, and God gave them over to the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians for 70 years. So Nebuchadnezzar here in 605 BC, is the head of the kingdoms that will rule over the world. Now, there's something you need to know about these particular metals that are important, and they're significant to the purpose of the vision here. The metals are significant because the metals are more valuable at the top, but they become less valuable as you go down the image. So the metals are more valuable at the top, and they get more and more inferior. So silver is inferior to gold, and then you have the other metal here that would be inferior, brass, and then you have iron. The Roman Empire is composed of iron, which is the least and the most inferior of all these metals. So gold, as we know, is very valuable. Iron is not so much as valuable. But there's something more important also about these metals. The most valuable ones are at the top, and the most unified are at the top. So gold is the head of the image here, Nebuchadnezzar. And then you have silver, Persia. Then you have the next kingdom is brass, and the next kingdom is iron. And the next kingdom, the toes, which we'll see in our next one, are iron mixed with clay. Well, you can't do that. You can't mix iron and clay together in a cohesion. Now, you can melt you can melt silver, you can melt gold. I don't know if you can melt iron or any of the brass, but you can melt gold, and you can basically, it's the weakest of all. But there's also something else about these metals, is they get stronger. They get cheaper, but they get stronger. So silver is stronger than gold, brass is stronger than silver, and iron is the strongest of all. And then you have clay, which is insignificant. But iron is the most strong. So what we're seeing here from these kingdoms that will rule the world is they get more and more weaker when it comes to their unity or cohesion. So let's just say Babylon's the most unified of all the nations, and then the next nation would come after that is Persia. So the nations become less unified, but stronger. Now, the second kingdom, he says in verse 39, Babylon's the first one, he says that in verse 38. Verse 39, after you shall arise another kingdom inferior to you, Nebuchadnezzar. So what kingdom is the next kingdom? Would be the Persian Empire. So the Babylonian Empire would rule from 605 BC to 539 BC. And then in 539 BC, the Persian Empire conquered the world, conquered the Babylonian Empire, conquered the king of Babylon, and basically the Persian Empire ruled over the world from 539 to 333 BC. So that's the second kingdom, and that will be the silver. The breast and the arms of silver are symbolized, by the Persian Empire. Now, he says in verse 39, there's a third kingdom that will rule over the world and the earth. In verse 39, so the next kingdom here, the third one, was actually the Greek Empire by Alexander the Great. So the third kingdom is equal to Greece, the Greek Empire. And history tells us that that empire split into 4 different kingdoms after Alexander the Great had died. All right, so that's in verse 239. He doesn't give you much description here, but he says that's the third kingdom that will rule over the world. So from 33 BC to 63 BC, the kingdom of Greece, which had by that time, after Alexander died, split into 4. Some of the sons of Alexander and some of his captains of his forces, basically the world was split into 4 different kingdoms at that point. So that's why we're saying Babylon was the most unified of all these kingdoms, but after that, you begin to see them split up. They're not quite as unified anymore. And at the end, we'll see in our next one, the 10 toes, there's really not a whole lot of unity at all in the 10 toes of which the image topples over after the stone hits it. Okay, the fourth kingdom is in verse 40. So there's the 3 kingdoms, Babylon, 605 BC, 539 BC. The second kingdom, Persia, 539 to 333 BC. And now the fourth kingdom, 63 BC, when Rome, the Roman Empire, annexed the land of Palestine and the Holy Land. Verse 40, the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaks in pieces and subdues all things. As iron breaks all of these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. Verse 41. All right, there's the Roman Empire is the fourth kingdom. But that kingdom split, as you see, in 2 legs of the man. The image, the 2 legs would be representing the Roman Empire, which split between east and west, and history tells us this. So Rome, as we know, ruled the world at the time of Christ, but Rome became less unified after it split into the 2 east and west. All right, then we see, the final form of the Gentile nations or dominating the world would be verse 41. Whereas you saw the feet and the toes were part of potter's clay and they were part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. There's a division again. This time it's going to be divided up into symbolic by 10, but there shall be in it the strength of the iron, as much as you saw the iron mixed with miry clay. And the toes of the feet were part iron, part clay. There's your division. But here's you cannot have a unity because iron and clay cannot mix together. Now you can melt gold, you can melt silver, some of the other metals and combine them, but you can't do that. You can't melt clay and iron and then put them together and join them. It won't work. So that was what we were seeing here. The toes are symbolic here, iron and clay. Now, there's been debated, what that really means or symbolizes. But let's just say the final form, verse 43, whereas you saw iron mixed with clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to another. There's no unity. Even as iron is not mixed with clay, it cannot happen. Now, some have suggested here the 10 toes are symbolized basically as a unity but division, which makes sense. In other words, there is some degree of unity, but there's also division in that unity. So let's just say if the 10 toes symbolize 10 independent nations or all the nations, then there's the unity, there's a unified whole of the Roman Empire, but the 10 nations are separate independent nations as well. That could be, and that's the interpretation that most have had of this passage and what verse 43 means. Well, that's probably, I would say, true, probably makes sense. So in other words, the final form here in verse 43 of the Gentile nations or the powers that will rule the world, in the last days, we see verse 44, in the last of these days, these kings of independent nations. Now, some have suggested they are 10 literal nations. And so some have tried to put, well, England, we put America in there, we put Germany in there, we put Italy in there, et cetera, et cetera. That's not necessary. Some have done that or tried to do it. It's not necessary. It's just a symbolic number. So the 10 are like the 10 horns that we'll see in Revelation, 10 horns, 10 toes. It's a symbol, it's a symbolic number like 10 commandments. Okay, we symbolize all the commandments of God by 10. So let's just say the 10 toes at the end of history, before the return of the Messiah, will have 10, or the independent nations will have their own sovereignty, their own independence, but there will be a unity of some kind to merge them together. All right, so let's just say this, the final toes would symbolize all the nations of the world. The final form of Gentile world domination would rule over Israel and dominate the world. But one of the things we're going to show you here, we'll see in our next week, we'll see our conclusion. What about America? That's a common question I've received over my career. Is America in Bible prophecy? Well, next week, we'll make you come back and we'll answer that question.